right, we're going to do a turn and talk after this slide, and that will be, what did Europe learn from Muslims in the Middle East during the Crusades? So let's get to our first slide, which is Europe learns from the Middle East in the Crusades. Like our video was showing us, in the era of the Crusades, post-classical era, we're around the year 1100 right now, the Muslim world is much more advanced than the Christian world. Almost every historian would agree with that statement. So, the Muslim world has trade routes existing all the way, connected all the way from China to West Africa, Indian Ocean trade route. We have the Trans-Saharan trade route. You have the Silk Roads. And the Muslim world, with geography in this era, is in the center of everything. Arabic is the trade language of a lot of the world, especially Afro-Eurasia. In the Muslim world, they build impressive cities, and they master many technologies and weapons, including gunpowder, which is from China, but then got further developed in the Muslim world, and eventually will lead to cannons. Some Muslim empires, like the Ottomans and the Mughals, will develop very strong gunpowder empires. Cannons and blowing shit up. Oh, this will work. Oops. Anyway, I made it hell on a minute. Anyway, so the Crusades last 200 years, and the Crusades help bring the Europeans out of the Dark Ages, because as they go into the Muslim world, they basically see a civilization more advanced than their own. And a lot of these people, peasants, even knights, even some nobles, but not many, as they go into the Muslim world, they start seeing, hey, we can bring some of these luxury trade goods back with us and sell them. And what happens is, this really plugs in Europe to the existing trade routes. And what we'll see is the Mediterranean Sea develops more trade after the Europeans go back and forth to the Muslim world in their crusades. Eventually they stop crusading so much, and more of the idea becomes, hey, let's start selling, buying and selling goods. So, along with goods, a lot of technology, they gain a lot of goods and knowledge, a lot of knowledge in the areas of chemistry, mathematics, medicine. Algebra, for example, is invented in the Muslim world, makes its way back to Europe. You can thank them or be really angry at them, however you feel about algebra. So these make their way into the Muslim world on these roads. And also what Europe does, because they have all these goods, like the video said, they take a lot of these roads that were built during the Roman Empire and they improve them and they start using them again. And they get used for trade goods, but also for the military. So we start seeing a more mobile military in Europe as well. I'll pause there for the turn and talk. All right. Commerce and the Crusades lead to the Renaissance. All right, so one of the most important effects of the Crusades was commerce. Commerce, pretty much, if you think of the word commercial, and in commercials, they're trying to sell you stuff, trying to sell you products or goods. So commerce pretty much means trade of goods. Silk, spices, gold in this era. Today we have a lot of commerce. Just go inside Target. You'll find a whole lot of goods from all over the world. That's a commercial center engaged in commerce. So commerce helps bring Europe out of their dark ages and into a period called the Renaissance, where they kind of wake up. So having a demand for these luxury goods, this leads people to build boats. Leads people to make a shipping industry using what you got from the reading, the magnetic compass, to have their ships go over the Mediterranean and bring goods into Europe. All right, so what are they bringing? Paper, it's a pretty big one, is brought into Europe. My personal favorite from the video, soap. They must have been a bunch of stinky bastards, is all I can think, if soap was like the big deal to come into Europe. All right, so soap comes into Europe. Perfumes, ceramics, glass, jewelry, medicines, textiles, clothing. I mentioned medicines, jewelry. And the biggest one, the most important one, actually was spices. Spices were big, and spices had to travel a long way to get to Europe. Most of these spices are from India, Southeast Asia, which is far away from Europe. But Muslims are connected to the Indian Ocean trade route, which is connected to the Silk Road, which goes to Europe. It's a very large Afro-Eurasian trade network. So why are spices like cinnamon, pepper, salt such a big deal? Why would these spices be such a big deal? Think of the time we're in. This is like almost 1,000 years ago. Why would spices be such a big deal? That was weird. Anyway. Say it again? Makes food taste a lot better. People are willing to pay for that. Do you have refrigerators? They had refrigerators back then. You probably do. Anyway, but they don't have refrigerators back then. So salt, for example, is a preservative. It preserves food, makes it last a long time. How long does beef jerky last for? Forever. How long do chips last for? Kind of a long time. You can still eat them and they're not going to go bad. Does that make sense? Because they're loaded with salt. Salt preserves food and meats, which means that they have more food, they can save it for a longer period of time, and people start living longer in Europe, which is a big deal. All right? So, this changes Europe. But what also really changes Europe is there becomes these wealthy Italian families who start getting involved in trade. So why Italy? Italy is the boot right here. There's Italy. Italy is the boot, and geography, they're closer to the Muslim world. They're also surrounded by the sea, which means that a number of people start building boats. They have an industry there making jobs. People take the boats, they go to the Muslim world, fill up their ships full of spices, silk, luxury goods that they can trade. The average person in Europe was what during the Dark Ages? Were they rich? They were most likely a poor farmer. Okay? Now, if you're a poor farmer and you have a potential option to go on an expedition, get in a boat, and go to the Middle East and get goods and bring them back, what would you rather do? Stay on the farm or maybe have this adventure and bring some things back and make money? Who likes the second option better? I would rather do that than stay on the farm for the noble. Okay? So this starts changing society because towns start growing. Cities get bigger. Cities were big during Rome because Rome was trading all the time. But during the Dark Ages, the cities died down as the nobles take over more land and the majority of population is farming. The Crusades begin and more people start going into town. They start getting goods, and when you get more goods, you need a place to sell them, and cities grow. Okay? So, we see economic growth. We see these families who start getting involved in trade and bringing goods. The cities start growing. There's more trade. People start living longer. And this is a beginning of a huge shift for Europe. It's like Europe is starting to wake up because Europe's plugged in, and Europe is doing much more trade than they were before. And some of these families are getting rich. We also see a change in the social structure in society. We used to just have knights and emperors on top, then your nobles who own the land, and the peasants. But there becomes this middle group called merchants. Muslim world had a lot of them. Europe didn't have as many until the Crusades. And then what happens is these merchants grow because they can make their own money. They don't make the money because they were given a title and land. They make their money off business. And they start rising up in the society and becoming more powerful in this era. What is the Renaissance? All right, Renaissance, the first, I don't know what that was. Anyway, Renaissance means rebirth. Renaissance pretty much means rebirth. It is basically when Europe kind of comes back. Now, Europe, the Roman Empire was in large parts of Europe. There was trade going on. They had a large empire, a lot of knowledge, a lot of education. Then Rome falls in 476. 476 AD, Rome falls, just before the post-classical era. And Europe spends a lot of the post-classical era in what historians would call a dark age. The Renaissance is seen as the rebirth. It's seen as a rebirth of culture, knowledge, trade, education, science. It happens from 1350 to 1550 about. That's about. So it pretty much happens at the end of the post-classical era, is the Renaissance. It is a large explosion of creativity. We see a lot of people think about the paintings from the Renaissance. A lot of art was created. A lot of sculptures. A lot of naked people. All right. But why is there so much creativity during this time period? Well, what happens is we have these rich families, and many of them are Italian. Many of them are bringing in goods from the Muslim world. A lot of scientific, a lot of curiosity. But also these worldly, materialistic, adventurous people who are starting businesses. These Italian families. The worldly, adventurous people. They also kind of like to show off what they have. They like to have the silk material. They like to live the good life. But they also want to sponsor artists because they can put their name on it. Like, yeah, I sponsored that artist. This expedition, that's mine. Rich people still kind of do this today. If you go to an art museum, you'll often find one wing of the art museum named after some rich person who gave a bunch of money. Still happens today. Rich people do like to put their name big on things sometimes. I won't mention the president. Anyway, well, I just figure he puts his name big on his buildings because he doesn't want to lose it. Anyway, so one of these families would be the Medici family. That's the Medici family who was in Italy. The Medici family were bankers. They were trading goods. They got really rich and powerful in the city of Florence. So, got really powerful in the city of Florence, and they start sponsoring artists. I'll give you one example. Michelangelo. Michelangelo was an artist who was poor. They allow Michelangelo to live in their house. They bring him up and they sponsor all the work that he does. Then, of course, it's like brought to you by the Medici family. They sponsor his expositions. But the Medici family, and a lot of these families who are making a lot of money, they also have a lot of respect for these artists because these artists celebrate individual achievement, which was very big during the Renaissance. In the medieval era in Europe, it was kind of like, don't sin, don't sin, don't sin, don't sin. Oh shit, there goes a girl. Sorry, don't sin. It was a life of where you were just supposed to be godly. Does that make sense? The Renaissance is like, well, maybe a good way to celebrate God is to show your talents and which God gave you. Does this make sense? Why the change? Because as their world opened up, they saw what was in the world, and not everything in the world was evil. And so the Medici family sponsor artists like Michelangelo because they value their ability to achieve, to show their talents. Because many of these business people have been able to show their talents in business. They can relate to them. And they sponsor it, and it makes them look even more powerful. Pause this.